Hi subscribers and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the UK Pension Reforms 2023, explaining about the new allowances and also touching upon QROPS. Okay, so as you would have seen in the news, there's some 4 big changes came in the 2023 reforms. First of all, your annual allowance is increasing from £40,000 to £60,000. Now, this is extremely valuable as it means you can now get up to £60,000 per annum into your UK SIP or your employer defined contribution scheme per annum compared to £40,000 in the previous years. So, a couple of stipulations here. When the money comes directly from your employer, it is the full £60,000 that can be contributed. So, very interestingly, if you own your own LTD, you could pay yourself £60,000 into your SIP or your pension pot with your employer, up to £60,000 with no tax, no national insurance, and no income tax to be paid. If you do make that £60,000 contribution from your employer, you obviously cannot then make any personal contributions throughout the year. So to play that the other angle, for example, you could do £30,000 from your employer and you could do £30,000 yourself as a personal contribution. The two of them together cannot go above £60,000. So, as I said, if you're running your own LTD, this can be a very tax efficient way to get £60,000 into a UK pension pot, which is free from inheritance tax, free from capital gains tax, and will also be free from lifetime allowance as of April 2024. So very smart financial planning for people there. If you're working for an employer and it's not your own LTD, you're working for a firm, what this means you can do is inside your employer-based scheme, you could have the option to increase your contributions to your scheme. This means your employer will typically be matching these contributions, normally at a very advantageous rate. So it's a very good opportunity to get as much pension savings as you can from your employer if you can afford it. Obviously, you'll have to go for an advice process with a financial advisor first, typically to understand that you can get more money into your pension pot. However, say yourself and your employer, you put £20,000 per annum into your pension scheme by doing additional contributions. That still leaves you a £40,000 allowance that you could still use to contribute yourself personally to, say, for example, a SIP with us here at Cameron James or any defined contribution scheme that you have. I think this is really important financial planning for people, and as a side point on this, you also have carry forward from the past previous 3 years when the rate was £40,000. So say at the moment you're sitting on £200,000 in your bank account. You don't quite know why it's there, you haven't got a goal, you haven't got an objective, you don't need the money in the short term and you want to invest it and want to do something with it, you could effectively do £60,000 in this tax year and soon the next tax year that's coming, and then obviously you could do £40,000 carry forward from previous years. The carry forward, you obviously have to minus off any employee or employer or personal contributions you made in those previous tax years. This is something we're working a lot at the moment with our clients here at Cameron James to go back through their previous 3 years of UK employment history to find out what pension carry forward they could be doing. So that's the first major point, is pension allowance has changed from 80, or pension allowance contribution has changed from £40,000 to £60,000. The second big change we've seen is the total abolishment of lifetime allowance. So the lifetime allowance rate was set at 0 in April 2023, and in the autumn statement 2023 in November, the UK government confirmed that it would be abolished from April 2024. Now, if you ask my opinion, I personally think the abolishment of lifetime allowance is one of the biggest tax slides I've seen from a UK government in a very long period of time. It's obviously been discussed to do with doctors and keeping doctors in the NHS for longer, which is beneficial for all of us. However, if you want to keep doctors in the NHS for longer, I'm sure, I'm not an expert, but I'm sure there's many things you could do in the NHS to keep doctors employed for a longer period of time without needing to remove lifetime allowance of every single UK resident. So that includes every single CEO of every FTSE 100, 250 company in the UK who likely has millions and millions of pounds in their pension pot. They will no longer pay any tax on that money. Now, if we have to ask ourselves from a cynical perspective, and if we look at the revolving door of politics, reminds me of my university days, there's a very close link often between government and big business. And I think that this total abolishment of lifetime allowance is going to benefit many, 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 many wealthy people and not just going to keep doctors inside the NHS system. Possibly I'm wrong there. Next, we move on to money purchase annual allowance. This is going to increase from £4,000 to £10,000, which effectively means that once you're in drawdown from your capital, you can continue to recontribute £10,000 per annum compared to the £4,000 previously. And in final one here, we have the increase in the tapered allowance from £4,000 to £10,000, with an increase of the adjusted income threshold from £240,000 to £260,000. Another point I'd like to touch on here is QROPS. Okay. So since 2006, which is 4 years before I entered the industry, QROPS has been a tool to transfer your UK pension pots abroad to a qualified recognised overseas pension scheme, which means you incur no tax charges in terms of excesses from the UK government, and you're allowed to do so. Now, the QROPS market has whittled down and whittled down and whittled down over the course of the years. Now we're kind of left with Malta being the main QROPS jurisdiction. A few clients still have bits and pieces in Gibraltar, and then we have a few esoteric situations such as New Zealand, Canada, etc., where if you're a resident in the same jurisdiction as your QROPS, then there could potentially be some tax advantages in that. But following the abolishment of Lifetime Allowance, Lifetime Allowance was the one last big thing that QROPS had over, say, a UK DC or a SIP or an international SIP. With the abolishment of Lifetime Allowance, we now have to look at QROPS and say, okay, if you have £2 million and you're living in France or you're living in wherever it might be, Portugal or another country, what is the difference now between utilising a SIP and, say, utilising a QROP? Well, from a Lifetime Allowance perspective, there won't be any difference. Obviously, as it's currently a zero rate tax and it's going to be abolished from April 2024. So it's an interesting time. What are we going to see happen in the market? Are QROPS going to tail off? Are we going to see less providers? I probably would have thought so. We also then have the interesting point that I've touched on before in this channel. What if we have Lifetime Allowance being reintroduced? Now, I have to state there is nothing on document to say that it's going to be reintroduced, but initially Labour talked about reintroducing Lifetime Allowance as soon as the Conservatives said they were going to abolish it or make it a zero rate tax. Labour have backtracked on that a little bit over the course of the months, and now they're kind of realising, I think, that actually it's going to be very complicated for the Conservative Party or the UK government to get rid of Lifetime Allowance and abolish it in such a short period of time from autumn 2023 to April 2024. I would not want to be in charge of that project for the UK government. I think there's a very high risk of things or errors being made when things are being done at breakneck speed. We're looking at 4, 5, 6 months to get that done. I think it's a very short period of time. Likewise, though, for Labour, if they do come back into power, which as we can see from our polls is looking relatively likely at the moment, nothing's confirmed though until it's finalised. But reintroducing Lifetime Allowance is probably far more difficult than Labour initially thought when they first made their statements to the press that they would be looking to or considering to reintroduce it. So it's an interesting one though. And I think for a lot of people out there, it depends upon the size of your pension pot as well. With a QROPS running at, say, £1,000 per annum compared to a SIP, which might be free or £100 or £200 per annum, there's obviously a cost element to utilising a QROPS. However, depending on the size of your pension pot, that cost element of the £1,000 might be significantly reduced. If, say, you have a £2 or £3 million pension pot in comparison to a £1 million pension pot. But really, we're going to have to wait and see what happens here. Obviously, it's going to be put through in April 2024, the full abolishment of Lifetime Allowance. So I think it'll be a case of watching this space with QROPS and seeing how the industry develops. And as always, I'll be keeping you up to date here on the channel. If you want to have a conversation with myself about Lifetime Allowance, any of the UK pension reforms, if you're watching this video and you're an existing client, I know our advisors are already telling you, but reach out to us, find out about your pension annual allowance of what you can contribute, look at your carry forward that you might be able to do from any form of UK employment income as well. And as always, take care with your UK pension assets.